your own righteousness enrich God in any kind of a way. And see, the issue, once again, what Elihu is saying is correct. It's correct. But the assumption here is that Job is guilty of sin. And then he goes on by pointing out that human conduct affects other human beings, but it doesn't affect God in the same way. And so what this means is that righteousness should not be practiced as though God were to be indebted to reward it. In other words, God is under no obligation to reward the righteousness established by human effort, nor should suffering be interpreted as proof that righteousness is useless. And we really need to understand this. God's dealings are not based on need, especially when it comes to he himself, but rather upon justice, God's justice and God's wisdom. The integrity of God himself is at stake in these matters. Sister Vanessa, go ahead.
Kind of took my words, Jonathan.
What's that?
I said you kind of took my words. I was just gonna say that God is so far above man that it doesn't benefit him anything in man. Nothing at all.
Right.
Whether he be righteous or sinful. It doesn't matter. God's independent of anything outside himself, so it doesn't matter. So, that's just how I look at it. It's like Elihu's trying to say to Job, in a good way, I guess, he's just trying to tell him that there's nothing above God.
Right.
There is no way that it doesn't matter what you do or what you say. It's not going to change anything because God is outside himself.
Right. God is, he's outside of these matters. And so I agree with that. I think but see, the thing about it is when God imparts righteousness, when he imparts righteousness, the other thing that goes along with the righteousness that he imparts is the sustaining providence that keeps the soul in that righteousness. And so Job is not a person who is going to suffer loss at all. And so we have to look, when it comes to Elihu, like we looked at the other three guys, and we all had a unanimous conclusion about these other guys. The issue here is that is God, or between Job and Elihu, who's the greater man in terms of his understanding, in terms of his fitness before God? Is Elihu greater or is Job greater? Are they equal? This is what we have to, these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. And these are the kind of questions that when we answer is going to shape our understanding of what is taking place here. What's taking place here. In verse 9, Job 35, verse 9, Elihu says, by reason of the multitude of oppressions, they make the oppressed to cry. They cry out by reason of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the fowls of heaven. There they cry, but none gives an answer because of the pride of evil men. Surely God will not hear vanity, neither will the Almighty regard it. What we have to ask ourselves is this: why is Elihu saying these things to Job? He's not just giving some platitudes. Sister Meg, go ahead.
So you said, why is he saying these things to?
I'm asking you. All I did was read so far. So what do you think?
So I think that he's saying these things to Job because in Job 32, verse 2, it says, "Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, the son of the Buzite of the kindred of Ram, against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God." Then verse 3 says, "Also against his friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer and yet condemned Job."
Right.
So would that be the answer to the question of why Elihu is doing this? Because he justified himself rather than God. And so the perception from this.
Let me ask you another question. Was Elihu?
No, I asked this question though. What do you think?
I know what you're asking, but I'm going to ask you a question.
You're going to ask me a question with a question?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. So the question is this: Was Elihu justified in that assessment? It says here, like you said, then was Elihu, because it says here that in verse 32, in verse 1 of chapter 32, so these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. So then Elihu says, his wrath is kindled against Job because he justified himself rather than God. So the issue is this: was Elihu correct?
Well, we find out in chapter 40 if he wasn't.
Was Elihu correct?
Well, what it says though is that,
because you are going by what Elihu said.
yeah.
So was Elihu correct?
Well, God answers it in chapter 40.
Did God say that Elihu was correct?
I mean, he didn't say anything. He never condemned Elihu nor corrected him.
Did God say did God say that Job was righteous in his own eyes?
Did God say
Did
Job
God
was
say
righteous in his
that
own eyes?
did God accuse Job of being righteous in his own eyes?
No, God did not say that Job was wicked or anything.
So then what did he say in chapter 40 that makes you believe that what Elihu says was correct?
40 verse 8. He says, "Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that thou mayest be righteous?" So he's saying, are you willing to speak about me so you can be right and I be wrong?
Well, I agree with God's assessment there for obvious reasons. First, God said it, and secondly, because we know that Job had was making the assumption that God was being cruel to him at times. Partly because he was silent on matters. But what you're talking about has to do with God speaking to Job after the fact. What information was Elihu operating off of? Because it wasn't off what God said. Unless you believe that God was speaking directly to Elihu, as he says in chapter 33, verse 6, when he says that Job got his wish and that he was speaking in God's stead. Was that true?
Not in
any sense.
No.
No, not in any sense. So there's no sense that in which that was true. So the question I want to ask you again is, in chapter 32, as you cited, was Elihu correct? Was Job? Because here's the thing. You said that Elihu was different than his friends. But in Job 32 that you cited, they said they stopped to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. And then in verse 2, then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, son of the Buzite, a son of Ram, because Job was against Job was his wrath kindled because Job justified himself rather than God. In other words, he was agreeing with Job's friends.
Well, I feel like Job's friends were making him out to be wicked, or that
No. You said you brought up Job 30.
So was Elihu correct about the statement that he made about Job's friends when he said because they had found no answer and yet condemned Job.
Well, hold on. I want to go back to what you state. What you
No, what
said.
I'm saying is though, was Elihu correct in his assessment about Job's friends?
No.
He wasn't.
No. Hold on. Let's go back. I want to go back to the verse you brought up. In chapter 32, you brought up, these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. And Elihu, his wrath was kindled for the same reasons. In other words, Elihu agreed with the friends. Elihu's problem with Job, or his problem with Job's friends, is that they were not able to make a sufficient argument against Job, and that's why he feels he needs to speak for 6 chapters to convince Job that his friends, what they said, was correct.
Yeah, and they condemned him, correct?
Right. They right. So what I'm saying is, in verse 2, Elihu is saying that his wrath was kindled. Why? Because Job justified himself rather than God.
Would we say in chapter 29 that he did? He was on the verge of it?
He was on the verge of what?
With the I did this, I did that.
Well, I know that 29 is important to you, but still, the issue that we have to deal with, Meg, is simply this. Still, let me go back to the original question that I asked you earlier.
According to chapter 29, would you agree?
No, I don't. I don't.
He was justifying himself.
I don't. No, I don't. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the issue of Job's affliction, which is what the whole book is about. Why is Job being afflicted? I'm asking you, why was Job being afflicted? Because all this talk about him being righteous in his own eyes comes after the fact, when his friends are accusing him. So what I'm asking you is, why was Job being afflicted in the first place?
He was being afflicted, but he was already deemed righteous in God's eyes. So suffering didn't really have
It had nothing to do with anything.
No, but but what I'm saying is when it comes to even us, when we are deemed righteous, when we receive salvation, are there times that although we have that imputed righteousness from Christ, that we are self-righteous at times? Do we fail?
That's not the issue. You're entering new narratives into this conversation.
I'm just asking. It is the same.
No, it's not the same. It has nothing to do with anything. These guys all 4 of these guys are saying that God is dealing with Job in a way either to condemn Job because of sin, or that the affliction, according to Elihu, was corrective because of sin. So my question to you, once again, is simply this. What sin did Job commit that Elihu is saying is justified by corrective action by God with this affliction?
Speaking without full knowledge.
This is a simple question. No, it's a simple question. It's not full knowledge. We know for a fact. We know for a fact that God said he was upright. We know why this happened. We can't get amnesia now, Meg. We can't get amnesia now.
I'm not getting amnesia.
So what I'm saying is this. What sin did Job do, or perform, or commit that was worthy of the affliction?
None.
Okay. So that means that whatever you feel about Elihu being correct, or his friends being incorrect or right, all these things are responses to Job's responses to their accusations about why he's being afflicted. And none of them, whether Elihu or his friends, has nothing to do with any sin that he did. That is the issue. And that is what you are missing.
So his past.
All of this happened. Sister, if we do not reflect on how this whole thing started, then the whole book was a wash.
No, the book is definitely not a wash.
I know it's not. But that's the issue. There's a reason why we were told what happened in the beginning so that we wouldn't get to a point where this is an issue.
Okay.
Don't agree unless you agree.
I agree.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Because I'm willing to continue the discussion. I really am.
No,
I'm feeling good tonight.
I know, I can tell. I'm good.
You sure? All right. Anybody else?
Could I say something?
Sure.
So I think maybe the issue is that we know that the Lord, when he comes in, the Lord rebukes Job. And I want to say, in my opinion, when I read that, it's a very gracious and gentle rebuke. I don't even know if it's a rebuke, honestly. It's God saying to Job, were you there when? As if, Job, you seem to know everything. And I think that is in a response to Job literally saying the one time that God was being cruel to him.
Right.
Which we know God isn't cruel. Now, I think if anything that Job said, that is worthy of the rebuke. We know that God does not say anything about, hey, Job, you defended yourself and you didn't defend me. You defended yourself. That's Elihu saying that right there. That's his assessment. I didn't get that. When I read God's rebuke, I don't get that he's saying, hey, Job, you didn't defend me when you should have been. Because Job stood on God's sovereignty. And think about this. In one breath, Job is saying God is sovereign. He doesn't mention Satan whatsoever, though we all know it is Satan on God's authority who is afflicting this man. So he says, he acknowledges God's sovereignty in it all. And in the one moment, his brain, and you could see it happening in any of us. Well, God's allowing this, or God is causing this. And this is cruel. I think this is cruel. It's a misunderstanding, but it's a very human response. I think that is what the rebuke is. And not that, hey, Job, you didn't defend me, because Job did acknowledge God's sovereignty. Job did all of those things that Elihu is saying. Job knows. We know that because we heard him speak it. Right. So I think that's where the confusion comes from, is the rebuke from the Lord. But he doesn't. He's so gentle. And I mean, he's really, his character, he seems to be of little words when he says the other three, you need to go and speak to Job and ask him to pray on your behalf. Because he's about the only one I'm going to listen to. You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, here's the thing. The issue is really, brethren, is really about when God comes in and corrects Job. When God comes in and corrects Job, the issue is, what is he correcting Job for? Is it for what Job did before all this happened, before his affliction, or is God correcting Job for things that occurred after being afflicted? This is the question. Sister May, which one is it? Was he being afflicted? Is God getting on his job? Is
After,
God?
after. It's after.
Yes, it's after.
Yeah.
It's after. And so, and this is all that what I'm trying to get at. What I'm trying to get at. These guys are coming after Job, and Job is, and no doubt, Job is saying some things that he shouldn't be saying, some very wrong things. He does say some wrong things, some bad things. You know, but they don't rise to the level of sin. But they do rise to the level of ignorance that God is correcting. Job is speaking, he speaks out of ignorance, and that's why God says, who is this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? You see what I mean? God is speaking from a proper context. The miserable company, the first three and Elihu, they're not. They are dealing, their responses to Job has to do with their assessment about Job for the thing or the things that warranted the affliction. God is not responding to Job because he hasn't been corrected by the affliction. God is responding to Job because of his response to his friend's response about his affliction. This is the issue that has to be looked at. What is God dealing with? The before or the after? And what were the friends dealing with? The before or the after? The three friends and Elihu were dealing with Job about something that they believe happened before, which warranted the affliction. God is dealing with Job for his responses made to his friends as to why he was afflicted. And this is what I want to throw out there. I want to throw out there. And I'll tell you, none of this is an easy thing to look at. But it's interesting that when it came to the three friends, we were all on the same page with that. But this guy shows his effectiveness by how we can see it, by how even all of us respond to him. He's a confusing character, Elihu, because he sounds good. He really does. But when you remember that he is addressing something that Job is being accused of before and which warranted his affliction. And so God deals with Job for what Job's responses were after the affliction in response to those who accused him as to why he was being afflicted. It's really tough, but it's a beautiful part of scripture. Sister Mariah and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, I definitely see and understand the point that's being made, and it has to be one of the two things that, in what you said, he has sinned, and so therefore God is punishing him for this, or the correctiveness. I definitely understand that, and I think that it's very imperative that we remember that it was God that said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And once we remember that God is the one that said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" then that puts everything into perspective of why Job is being tried and why Job is going through the affliction. Um, not some secret sin that is hidden, whether it be for correctiveness or just being afflicted for that. But I see here in 13 that he's basically telling Job why God is not hearing him, because of his vanity. And so I think that that's interesting, uh, seeming that that is not the reason why God is not answering him.
Right.
So he's just proven himself incorrect, yet once again, while he's speaking on the behalf of God.
Right. Absolutely. Because God does eventually respond to Job, and Job knows God heard him. He knows that. He knows that at the time when God speaks. Brother Jeffrey and then Candy.
Jonathan, I think there's some of this, and you may disagree, and the panel may disagree. A good portion of this that just has to fall into the category of God is God and we are not. We may never fully understand all of the reasons why God allowed the things that happened to Job to happen. I mean, yes, there was good that came out of it. Yes, Job's three friends were revealed for what they were. We're learning now what Elihu was. But nevertheless, when the enemy, the devil, came to God and says, let me have him, God could have said no, but he said, okay. I understand around God
Brother, your phone's having a problem.
pointed out many times. What's the problem?
No, there's a lot of static coming from your phone. But go ahead, keep speaking.
Okay.
Keep speaking.
No, I think I'm going to stop right here, Jonathan, because like I said, I've had problems with our phone service. We're getting it changed tomorrow, and Lisa said it's breaking up. So I'll just go ahead and stop it right here.
All right, no problem, brother. No problem at all. Sister Candy, go ahead, and then I'll get into verse 9.
I don't think Candy's on here anymore.
Oh, you're right. All right. So verse 9. And I'll read verse 9 through 13. Elihu says, by reason of the multitude of oppressions, they make the oppressed to cry. They cry out by reason of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the fowls of heaven. There they cry, but none give answer, because the pride of evil men, surely God will not hear vanity, neither will the Almighty regard it. And he's pointing out here that many cry out under oppression, and not all the cries are true prayers. We have to ask ourselves, why is Elihu saying this? He says that some cry because of pain, but do not seek God sincerely. This is what he's saying. Why is he saying this? He's pointing out that true prayer